Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff and Joe, the scientist, explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lin and...
I'm Joe.
There's a rumor that Facebook's parent company, Meta, is developing an artificial intelligence to reanimate dead users, and it keeps going around and around on social media. It appears to be bunk, but the hoax did serve to cast light on how advancements in AI, that's artificial intelligence, pose increasingly serious questions for society as computers emulate humans. So this story that this man told in an article was pretty interesting. He said, "My parents don't know that I spoke to them last night. At first they sounded distant and tinny, as if they were huddled around a phone in a prison cell. But as we chatted, they slowly started to sound more like themselves. They told me personal stories that I'd never heard. I learned about first time, and certainly not last time, my dad got drunk. Mom talked about getting in trouble for staying out late. They gave me life advice and told me things about their childhoods, as well as my own. It was mesmerizing." But he was not actually talking to his parents. This mother and father live inside an app on that man's phone. They're voice assistants that are constructed by the California-based company Hereafter AI and powered by more than 4 hours of conversations they each had with an interviewer about their lives and memories. The company's goal is to let the living communicate with the dead. I wanted to test out what it would be like, the man said. I'm going to take that part out. The real people were totally alive. They were not dead. they just recorded this for this experiment. And Amazon shared a clip in June of a little boy listening to a passage from The Wizard of Oz read by his recently deceased grandmother. Her voice was artificially recreated using a clip of her speaking that lasted for less than a minute. So the first step in this is they record the person talking. So to get a good digital replica of someone, you really have to have a convincingly authentic voice representation. So you need data and lots of it. The Hereafter AI, their work starts when the people are still alive, obviously, because you can't talk to them otherwise. And they ask questions of them for hours about everything from their earliest memories to their first date to what they believe will happen after they die. And that guy that...
While they're alive.
While they're alive. Yes.
So they commit to the
right.
Replication of their voice. I suppose it would be like an issue if you just took like sound bites.
Yeah.
I mean, they're dead, but...
Well, I don't know, because this technology is quickly progressing, and they are able to do that, although perhaps not as convincingly.
So it's interesting. Like, you need a lot of training data, or else you'll have what's called hallucination or stuff like that. Hallucinations are, in machine learning, are essentially acting like something is, it's producing something that seems legitimate, but it's really not. It's like it's faking a real output, or, real meaning that you would have put in the training data. So like, for instance, you're talking to your fake dead grandmother and she says, yeah, and then I went and I was a stripper on the strip. And that's not true. That never happened. It was never in the training data.
Well, I don't know. Maybe.
Well, maybe. And it could maybe potentially infer that if it was a large enough model. But the real risk, I think, is that their memories would be polluted by essentially fake interaction. Now,
true.
The people could have, the people who record their voice, they could entirely commit to, yes, what it produces may not really represent me. They might fully say that's okay. But even so, it's like imagine this, okay? Buddha 2.0 is born in 2030 and they record his voice and everything, and then 2,000 years later they have only the replication using machine learning algorithms, and if it has changed at all in that time, it's not really representative of that person anymore.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So there could be an issue, and probably, especially if you change the model at all, it's going to regress to a mean version, a mean meaning average version.
Not a cruel
version, an average version of a median person. So they'll kind of become more generic. Now, maybe that's okay. Maybe it's just their voice, but I could definitely see there being real issues with that are not anything to do with, it's just a natural effect from having that technology is now people are going to have some issues like remembering the real version of who that person is.
Yeah, I could see that.
And also, I really would say to people, okay, you'll never be satisfied with what the thing produces. The person is dead. And no matter how like nostalgic you are or whatever. Sentimental, whatever. If you're in grief, you still have grief, whatever. Talking to the thing, you're not actually talking to the person. And it's probably just making it worse for you.
I don't know that some of these people that I read about that have tried this really felt like it was comforting. So Storyfile records all of these responses on video rather than just voice alone. And then they
reproduce images.
Yeah.
It's probably a good idea because multimodal machine learning models, that means like for video and text, generally generalize better than a single modality. So like if you just have text, it doesn't actually produce as good of output as text plus video.
You mean audio?
Or audio, yeah. Whatever. Audio, text. You want as many channels as you can get.
They say they do turn the videos into a digital version of the person so you can see and speak to them, but they can only answer questions that have already been programmed because of the input.
Yeah, so they heavily penalize the model for going off script.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so they warn that users need to be careful not to think of this technology as recreating or even preserving people. The intention was to create a digital monument where you can interact with that person.
Yeah, so like an advanced recording.
Right.
That's really probably the best way to look at it.
Not in order to pretend they're alive, but to hear about them, remember how they were, and be inspired by them again.
Yeah.
So that's okay.
So another thing is there are voice replication machine learning models. So you record just their voice, and then you can then have them say whatever you want. That could probably serve a very similar purpose, and it would be far easier to train that. In fact, I think there's some general models that don't need to be fine-tuned on individual voices.
However, wouldn't that be much more likely to go way off script and say goofy things like I'm a stripper?
Well, no, you would put in text or you would put in an audio file, and then it would act as if the person is saying that. So for instance, if you had like a diary of theirs, you'd want to use that model because it doesn't determine what they're going to say, just how it sounds when they're saying it.
Interestingly, this is not an relatively expensive product if you want to be a consumer of talking to your dead parents. The top tier unlimited version on Hereafter lets you record as many conversations with the subject as you like, and it costs $8.99 a month. Storyfile requires a $499 payment up front, and then you have unlimited services. And Hereafter also has, Hereafter services are $108 per year. So $8.99, so essentially, $108 a year. The problem I see with that is that it would be really difficult to just decide I can't justify paying $9 every month for this service, but you would be in effect silencing your dead parent.
Yeah.
That would be, they've really got...
There's a lot of issues with it.
And I think that it's almost like being held emotionally hostage to it, and it doesn't seem like that's quite fair. Although as a business model, hell, that's pretty smart.
Yeah, that's pretty smart. I mean, if you own the audio files and you have unlimited access to the audio files you recorded, you could just take those and put them in a different model. So I imagine within the next few years, there will be a consumer open source model that anyone will be able to run. Almost certainly that will be the case.
Especially how fast AI is progressing.
Yeah.
I have to say, though, when the first time around reading this, I didn't think of this, but this time it occurred to me. Let's backtrack. Remember when I found the little micro cassette of my mom's recordings and I gave it to that guy to put onto something that I could hear it, and he turned it into an MP3? When I listened to it, I thought, this doesn't sound like my mom. I mean, I knew it was my mom, but it did not sound like my mom. So I gave it to Tom, and he said, that's not how I remember her sounding. And I didn't give it to anybody else yet, and I will eventually.
Memories are changing, or?
No. I mean, when I think about it, yeah.
Or was a distortion of
there was some distortion, but I think the most tremendously bizarre part of it was, now keep in mind, my mom grew up, was born and raised, grew up, and lived until she was 25 years old in southern Ohio, along the Kentucky border. I never perceived her as having a kind of that Kentucky accent.
Oh, yeah.
But it was really obvious in this recording. It was like, what? And then the other thing that was really weird is that she was recording everybody secretly, which I shouldn't really be surprised by because she really kind of liked gadgetry and stuff. And she used to get what she called spy catalogs, which were all the little
You can see where that comes with everyone in the family. I swear to God.
Well, in any case, she recorded us secretly, which was weird. She sounded like she was from Kentucky, which I didn't remember her sounding like that. So that was really strange. So I could see that, you know, when you're talking to somebody and you can see them, you're perceiving them a certain way. But when there's time and distance, or you're not seeing them, it may not be the way you remembered, because there are other things that go into that besides just sound.
Your memories over time there'll be layers that are stripped off over time.
Yeah.
And there may be like a core version of that. Yeah, I think your memories become more general over time. You know, so how you remember things is like smoothed off.
Yeah, I could see that. The other part of that is that I think that when you're interacting with somebody you know well or you care about and they care about you, you speak differently, your inflection is different, the words you use is different. And if you're being recorded in an interview,
you're going to be
that may sound
different.
Very different. And the fact that my mom knew she was secretly recording us, we didn't know, so we sounded like us.
Oh yeah, that's true.
She knew, so maybe that was part of the thing, is that there was some different,
slight off how you remember
stiltedness.
Now though, you having listened to those permanently changed your memory of her.
Yes.
So, but
and not
again,
necessarily in a good way.
Yeah, but again, it's like accept things how they are. I mean, like you can't just like perpetually be thinking, oh, I wish I could keep my memories. I wish I wish. Instead, there's the idea of non-attachment. It doesn't mean like you're emotionally distanced from things, but when things pass, you pass as well. When people die, you die as well. No.
Your relationship with that
your
thing
relationship evolves, and you recognize it evolves, and you consciously and willingly accept it evolving, because no matter what, that will happen. I mean, things will evolve. You are evolving. The ship of Theseus. Have you ever heard of the ship of Theseus? Over time, they replace boards and everything, replace the mast, replace everyone, the crew, replace everything. Everything has been replaced. Is it the same ship? Well, I mean, you can interpret it lots of different ways. You can look at it from lots of different contexts. Most people would agree it's the same ship and heart, at least. And that's how everything is, in multiple different ways and kind of in opposite ways. Like, things are always changing. The universe is always like that. You're exchanging particles all the time with your ambient environment. I don't know. It's kind of like with respect to the machine learning model that replicates someone's voice. I mean, if you have a Band-Aid, you can pull it off slow, or you can just rip it off and get it over with, They are a little predatory in that they are allowing you to keep that Band-Aid slowly peeling off, And they're making money off of it. Actually, they're making pretty good money off it, I'd imagine.
Yeah. The initial, so the one that cost $500 a year, the initial investment, or whatever it was, I don't even remember how much it was. The initial investment seems a lot, but really, if it's like, 2 hours, 3 hours of their time of recording you, and then it is all electronic. It's all automatic.
And that model, I imagine, doesn't use very much computing power at all.
Yeah, probably not.
But, all that said, if it helps somebody, do it. Actually, you could use that for all sorts of things. Like, I imagine you could do that with someone who's alive and then do that with them. Like, take their voice with you when you're on a trip or something.
Okay,
you
that's
know?
just bizarre.
I mean, you could do all sorts of stuff with that.
That is almost akin to assault.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
I mean, if they are willing.
Okay, so we've talked about electronic voices of dead people, but now let's talk about really interacting or really hearing from dead people. Many people have reported receiving communications from the dead via telephone calls, images on televisions and computer screens, and more. Paranormal investigators have set up their gadgets in long abandoned places and recorded and played back the recordings. Hearing what they say sounds like human voices, although most claims tend to be explainable. There certainly is some compelling evidence out there.
Is that like EVP?
Yeah.
EVP, okay, yeah.
Okay, so in my own life, the day my mom died, my brother and sisters and I were all sitting around in her living room. We were sort of shell-shocked, as you are. And all of a sudden, her printer started printing. It was one of those old dot matrix kind, and it's very distinctive sound, and the paper's just a long strip of paper, and it just kept reeling out that paper. We all
not
turned.
Printing anything?
It was printing. Oh, it was definitely
okay.
printing. And we all turned and looked at it in shock, because we hadn't really slept, and it was just we're just in a state of whatever in our brains. So we looked at it, and finally someone got up and went over and looked at what it was printing. And it was a Franz Kafka story. Now, I texted my little sister this morning and asked her, all I said was, do you remember what the printer printed out the day Mom died? That's all I asked her.
Uh-huh.
And she said, these are quotes, and this is all she said. There are no coincidences. Nothing is insignificant. That was one quote. And that is a Franz Kafka quote.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And the other one is, anyone who keeps the ability to see beauty never grows old. There was lots more. It appeared to be an entire book or an entire story.
Oh, yeah.
But that was what she remembered of it.
Interesting. It wasn't connected like fax, was it?
No, there wasn't. No.
Was there fax back then?
Yeah, there was fax, but she didn't have fax hooked up to her phone or to her computer. In fact, I don't even think she had it hooked up to the internet at that time, because it would have been hooked up via a phone line. And the internet at that time, you actually called a phone number and interacted with a database, and that was not happening. Now, why she would have had a Franz Kafka book on her computer, I don't know. I don't know if anybody ever even looked to see if it was on that computer. I don't know what happened to that computer. I have no idea. I texted my brother and asked him the same thing. What did the printer print out the day that Mom died? And he said he couldn't remember, but he did remember this, that at some point, I'm assuming before she got sick, she kept saying there's this word in my head, and I just can't get it out, and I don't know what it means. And the word was Kafkaesque. And so you couldn't look things up on the internet then.
Oh, so she heard it, but she couldn't look it up?
I don't know if she heard it. I don't know where it came from. So he went to the library.
Because that's a real word.
Yes. It is describing the sorts of situations that Kafka related in his books and his stories. So Tom went to the library and he looked up this word, and then he found Franz Kafka, and he read, probably knowing Tom, he probably read all the stories by Franz Kafka. And he felt that was significant. And although he didn't remember what the printer had printed out, that was his response to me asking, what did it print out?
Oh, yeah.
So that was kind of interesting. My memory is that it had something to do with, and I've read maybe one book by Franz Kafka. I did not read The Metamorphosis because it had to do with a cockroach, and I didn't think I could handle that. As a person turns into a cockroach. I read something else and I don't remember. It might even have been his autobiography. But in any case, what I remember the printer printing out had something to do with a dog crossing in front of Franz Kafka's path, and him saying, there are no coincidences, even a black dog crossing in front of your path, it has significance. So that may have been the illustration, and then there are no coincidences, nothing is insignificant was the quote that Jackie remembered from that. But in any case, that was interesting. So what do you think? How would that happen?
Well, I mean, you can approach it from a lot of different perspectives. Maybe there is some other aspect of the universe that isn't just the material world that we know, and it can influence things like that. That's one interpretation. Another is an explanation that seems pretty unlikely, but could still be possible. Like someone timed it to be like that. Like a person actually got on a computer and
no, nobody did
that it was connected to fax. That
No.
she timed it to be like that.
Nope, she'd been.
Probably not. That it was somehow just incidentally the printer was set to do that. You know, either it was set to do that at that time or at a time.
I don't
or
think those
it
things
was
were possible then.
stuck on something. You know, for instance, the thing was set to go and then it just didn't go until that point randomly.
Okay, so
But see, I think the main thing about it is unless you have something that you can use to discern between the possibilities, that you'll always be left with I don't know. You know what I mean?
right. So let me just address some of these. She didn't have a fax machine. She didn't have and computers back then were not fax capable. She was not well enough to have done anything on her computer for many months.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the only people that probably would have used that computer at all in months would have been me, Tom, or Jackie, and possibly Cook. But I don't. My mom had been so sick in recent weeks that I don't think anyone came over and like screwed around on the computer. And you know, I just don't think so. So that's not possible. I mean, that's possible, but that's the most
likely.
That's not likely. None of this is likely.
Yeah.
But that would probably be the most likely, is that somebody, for some reason, got on her computer.
Well, they would have had to do that. Someone else would have had to do it.
Right. So that it would be the most likely. The other thing you said was setting the computer to print at a certain time. I don't think that was a capability of Windows. This was probably Windows 3 or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that was a capability. You would have had to get into DOS, and nobody else but me and David did anything with DOS back then. So the only thing would be if Tom, Jackie, Cook wouldn't have done that. So Tom or Jackie or I would have gotten on there. And I know I didn't. I don't think Jackie did. And if Tom had, he would have said by now. Because he's not, he's not the kind of person that would BS yet like that. That would be kind of a sick joke.
So another interesting aspect of this is, okay, let's assume that there's a different phenomenon at play. So for instance, to set limits on it, a person can die, then still influence things. This is what is inherently happening, is a person dies or something, maybe they fucking go into a meditative state. It doesn't matter. And then they can influence things without their body being there. You know what I mean? I mean, that's inherently what's happening. Your influence is now divorced from your body, right?
Right. And I think there are a lot of mystics who say that they can do that through meditation.
Yeah. Okay. So the really interesting part to me is, a printer is really complicated. A computer is really complicated. A fucking voice recorder is really complicated. Think how physically, if we're assuming it's all materialism. So, there's a different aspect of reality we don't know about, but you still have to, for instance, push the right bits down in order to record something, or to play on a print, print something on a printer. So imagine what it would take for a ghost or whatever, a soul, to make something run on a printer. For instance, you could imagine something moving a mouse, clicking on the PDF file, waiting for it to open, going to print, or however it worked back then, clicking on print, getting the aspect ratio and all that right, and then printing it. You can actually imagine them doing that, but without actually going through the normal interface, it becomes a lot more complicated. Like, for instance, like you can imagine a spirit, whatever, going to into the hardware itself. You know what I mean? And like pushing down RAM and like pushing new electrons through the CPU.
I just want to say something. So if we're gonna, even for a moment, entertain that it's really a spirit, I think that we could also entertain that it's something beyond our understanding. There's some electronic thing that's going on.
So there's another thing. If you don't accept materialism, that means you don't accept like if you could like divorce yourself from your body and look at the true nature of reality. Like, so you're not going through your own perceptions or whatever. You zoom down to like the CPU level and you discover that it's entirely conceptual. There's no electrons going through the thing. There's not even any hardware. It's only becomes material, quote unquote, when you perceive it. So that's an entirely different model of reality.
Okay.
Really important, because it will always look like materialism, but you'll never be able to know whether or not it's entirely conceptual or materialism.
Okay, and that's one way of looking. Okay, I'm sorry.
But the really important part is for a spirit or whatever to affect how things are working as you're observing them in that model of reality means all they have to do is just say, let it print, because that itself is a concept. So the concept interacts with the concept of the printer. It starts printing, quote unquote. Really what it's doing is influencing your understanding of what's going on.
Okay, so there's one other way you could look at it. When you go down there to the CPU level and it's just electrons being affected, correct?
Yeah.
What if a spirit could affect the electrons, because that is just energy?
Yeah. So like what I was saying at first, in a completely material world, presumably the ghost or whatever could actually interact with individual electrons, but it would have to know how to do that. And the complexity involved is really high. That, and it's not necessarily it can't do that. Again, we're talking about something we have no information about. So in this alternate part of, this part of reality we have no information about, perhaps that one ghost can tap into the understanding of everyone. And so it really can do things at that level. There's nothing stopping that from being how it works.
I mean, if we're going to say or entertain the thought that my dead mother communicated, or made
somehow
the printer print, then I guess any of those scenarios could be true, because
when you get into the really esoteric, models of reality, there's a lot of possibility. I mean, it's essentially unlimited numbers of possibilities. One that I've talked about before, but it's really attractive to me because it actually is potentially very close to how some physicists really believe reality really is in quantum physics, the multiple worlds interpretation. Certain variants of the multiple world interpretation say that you can have two versions of the universe that aren't really interacting, kind of traveling in parallel, and they can suddenly start interacting. There's nothing stopping them from not like passing information from one to the other. So as we've talked about before, one way this all could happen that is really close to how some physicists interpret quantum mechanics is, you're in one version of the world, your mom did not die, or at least not then. And then in another, she did. That's the one you have recorded. You, the person I'm talking about now, recorded this track of history.
Okay.
And at some point, there was an interaction that didn't alter your memory. So it's really complicated, but your memory of how things have been essentially determines which universe you're in. And partial interactions may be possible in certain very constrained, somehow. In certain circumstances, there may be partial interactions between different histories of worlds. They're essentially the same, but they what?
So are you saying that it's possible that in this other dimension or whatever, my mom just simply walked over, pushed the button to print?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is she literally walked over and pushed the button to print, or whatever, however it worked, and there was some kind of convergence somehow. No one knows how that would work. And then it actually caused it to print in the history you remember. We know that kind of thing can happen at a microscopic scale. That's not like a question. That it literally does happen like that at a microscopic scale.
That's terrifying.
It's very interesting though. So like Schrodinger's cat, that's the idea. One family of interpretation is Schrodinger opens the box at some point and either the isotope has decayed or not decayed. And the cat either died or didn't die. But before he opens the box, it is both dead and alive.
Right.
But if you take it to its logical conclusion, there's different interpretations depending on which memory you have encoded. So like observers are essentially memories of what has happened. Schrodinger, just before he opens the box, I'm talking in one perspective, one history, like conditional on this particular set of memories he has. The cat is not like alive or dead. He's looking at every universe that is consistent with what he is looking at. He opens the box, and due to like random, it's like almost thermodynamic effects, one or the other history is resolved. So it resolves, constrains itself to a very highly constrained version of one of the histories of the cat. From the cat's perspective, it goes into one of the histories. So it either dies or doesn't die. One thing to note is that it might be possible for the cat never to observe itself to die, which is really interesting. It's called quantum immortality. The cat actually cannot observe itself dying. So the radioisotope never, there's no radiation emitted. Poison never goes into the box. The cat never dies. It always sees the box open. So you have to wonder, then what is the cat in the history that Schrodinger opens the box?
The cat is dead.
But there's another interpretation, which is really interesting, is there's what's called the fine-tuned universe theory. I guess it's a theory where all of the constants of the universe seem to be very fine-tuned. If you change them a little bit, the whole universe is wacky and can't support intelligent life, observers, or anything. So the implication is that something is keeping it very precisely on track. And it just so happens that this also potentially explains that, where in all the universes where the constants of the universe are diverging from that precise, that people can't exist. So you cannot observe those. You're always on a history where the universe is stable, where you're alive, until you lose your memory, which is also very interesting, because if you lose your memory, then the entire universe could change, which is terrifying.
This is a quote. As fantastic as it seems, the mystery of phone calls from the dead is not an uncommon one. Those who've researched the phenomenon have determined that these calls usually occur within the first 24 hours of the death, but there have been cases in which the calls were received as long as 2 years after. The call is usually filled with heavy static, and the phantom caller's voice is faint, as if far away. Far away indeed. End quote.
Yeah.
Okay, so this actually happened to me.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't it happen to you?
Yeah. About 11 years after my mom died, I was woken up to a phone call in the middle of the night. When I picked up the phone, it was really staticky, but I could hear my mom saying my name, like with urgency, and like from a distance, beyond or behind the static. I was absolutely, definitely awake.
Awake. And...
I was absolutely awake. So there was that happened, but also back right after she died, we went through a period of time when the phone would ring, and this happened to everybody in the household. You pick it up, and it was a weird, staticky, almost like someone was trying to put a fax call through. You know, when a fax call goes, weird noise. It was almost like that, but
well,
not.
So like glitchy audio?
Glitchy audio, like from a scary movie type of thing.
That's interesting.
And it
like
was,
distorted.
Yes.
Like how distorted?
Like electronically distorted.
Like
almost
like if you ran a filter over it?
Like a little bit of feedback.
Oh,
like a little
okay.
bit of feedback.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But static.
That's interesting.
But I don't remember ever hearing a voice at that time. And this happened numerous times. I went to Radio Shack and got a recorder and put it on the phone so that if you answered the phone, you could hear it. And it sounded the same way. And it happened.
Actually, you recorded it.
I recorded. I don't have
I
those
do
recordings
remember
anymore.
there being a couple instances where you got interesting things. Like in Earl, you actually had a call, I think, that it was some anomalous...
That was the one that was 11 years after my mom died.
Oh,
that
okay.
was the call. It was the middle of the night.
Oh, okay.
But in Earl, so then that
but
happened.
But it recorded it.
No, that was after the...
Oh, okay.
That wasn't when I had the recorder.
There was another one where it was on the recorder.
So first, right after my mom died, we had this spate of calls. You were very little, so you would have been less than a year old. And so we had this spate of calls where if I answered the phone, or Carrie answered the phone, or Christina answered the phone, this never happened to your dad. But if the three of us answered the phone, it would be this weird, feedbacky, staticky sound.
It'd make me not ever want to answer the phone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then that stopped. It didn't last for very long, and then it stopped. It didn't happen again. And then fast forward, you were 10 or 11, and we were in Earl, and the phone would ring, and it was the same thing. And we may have captured that on an answering machine because we did have an answering machine for the business there.
Yeah.
So it may
and
have...
I seem to recall that being the thing, is it was actually on the answering machine, and when you played it back, you heard it.
Yeah, but the last time that I remember anything happening was that phone call I got in the middle of the night, and I could hear my mom. It sounded like my mom calling my name with urgency.
Urgency like distressed, or urgency like...
Okay, like this. Like if I was calling your name, I'd say, Joe, 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 Joe.
Interesting.
Not like, ah! But like...
Like I wasn't responding at first, but you really needed my attention.
Like if
really
I called you on the phone and I'm trying to tell you something and you said, just a minute, and I can hear that you're doing something, you're making yourself a sandwich, it's like, I'm trying to get your attention. Or like when India has pocket dialed me and I'm calling out her name to like, India,
get her
India.
attention. Yeah.
So it was that kind of thing. And it went on for probably a minute or two. It went on for a while.
You just listened.
Or
would you say?
No, I was speaking. I was like, yes, what? And then it just kind of just faded out and then clicked. And that was it.
That's really interesting. Because, I mean, other than that, you have firsthand experience with that. Well, it's like I was saying earlier. Something like, again, let's say it's an esoteric, it's not a prosaic explanation. Something is interacting with the phone line or the whole phone system to produce that. Especially more recently, I don't think it's like you can just send a signal. Like you could like put your voice box up to a electronic modulator and produce a signal.
Well, there are people, I think you brought up the other day something about how different ways people were trying to hack phones, the old-fashioned kind of phones. So when they went to the push-button phones from the old-fashioned dial that went...
So like digital?
So it was digital. People discovered that they could just do the tones and hold it up to their phone.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that.
So
it actually is playing the audio of the...
Yeah.
It makes sense, because if the line is built for audio, or it's essentially like frequency or amplitude modulated electronic signals, and those directly correspond with the sound waves, and then the line is built for that, then it makes perfect sense you'd actually send beeps. It's the sound of beeps down the line.
And what are sounds of beeps? They're energy.
Yeah, so, but, okay, like, imagine being a ghost, which does not necessarily correspond with the popular conception of a ghost.
Right.
And you're floating around in a different dimension or whatever, and you find the line, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So if it's like an FM modulated signal you have to produce the phone call, mm-hmm. and presumably it's an actual, like, there's like a structure to the signal to initiate the phone call. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? Not only how do you do it physically, but how do you know how to do it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like a plumber ghost. How does the plumber ghost know where the clog is? You know what I mean? Or the non-plumber ghost, I guess. Right. He doesn't know anything about plumbing. Now that's why I said earlier, okay, there's no restrictions on this other esoteric dimension. Uh-huh. So each individual can tap into the knowledge of whatever potentially. Right. Or there's some other explanation from the quantum mechanical, whatever, quasi realistic explanation. The phone line, again, that is a dead ringer. It's like, imagine this.
No pun intended.
Yeah, it's like you have two lines. One line, the left line, goes from phone A, to left B. The right line goes from right A to right B. A person in the right, talking in right A, mm-hmm. it goes to right B usually. But if there is an exchange of information across that mm-hmm. boundary, you are talking in the right A and you're going to left B. Mm-hmm. If the person in the right didn't ever die, the person on the left can still have that interaction. And you very well might experience fuzziness. I mean, I don't think there's any like explicit model of macroscopic quantum mechanical interaction between different histories, but it's conceivable there would be like an obvious effect as you're exchanging information between two histories. Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, it's not just dead people. I might interact with myself. I get a call from myself, you know?
Okay, well, that could explain a lot of things that people have precognition.
Yeah.
They have dreams of things that actually happen,
so
which we
presumably
will talk about at some other time.
That would be like you actually went there, and then you came back, and then your brain is communicating with the other brain, the other version. Right. And you're getting information across.
Okay, so my experience apparently is not unusual. That I didn't see anything else about people getting phone calls like that where we picked it up and nobody was speaking, but we could hear this kind of feedbacky, staticky noise. But here's another one. I only copied down a couple of these because I thought it was pretty interesting. So this guy said, well, maybe it's a girl, Janae, said, this happened to my older brother Matt about a year ago, just a few weeks after my oldest brother Jeremy's best friend Joe died of heart trouble. Okay, so Joe was her oldest brother's best friend. Matt is another brother. So Matt received a phone call from a person that sounded exactly like Joe, the dead best friend. He said something like, Matt, it's Joe. Is Jeremy home? Something really strange is going on.
This was, they heard that from...
Joe is dead. The phone rings. Matt answers it. Joe says, Matt, it's Joe. Is Jeremy home? Something really strange is going on. Matt freaked out and could hardly answer. No, he's not. Sorry. Then the phone hung up, and Matt looked at the caller ID. It read, out of area. So Matt tried star 69, but it was unable to trace the call. They never got another telephone call from Joe, and it scares Matt still to think about it.
Yeah.
Okay,
no shit.
Okay, so in this case, it could have been somebody that sounded like Joe.
Yeah.
And knew Jeremy and knew Matt.
So, like, the explanations that would not be... Like, if there was the completely normal material universe as we understand it, it would look like someone is, trying to fake that. Someone who just sounded like that. It was completely incidental. They said those things.
Right.
As
I know, all I have to do is put on, kind of like putting on a Halloween mask. I just put on the personality of somebody, and I can make myself sound pretty much like them pretty easily.
Yeah.
I don't have to. I mean, if you just think about how a person's face moves and how they seem like they act, and then you can sound like them.
And some people are not as good about that as others.
Some people are really good, and some people it comes naturally and they're not even thinking about it. I have to think about it.
So some people are probably freakishly good at that.
Yeah.
And presumably that could just be anyone.
It could be. Or it could have been that this guy, Matt, experienced the same thing I experienced when my phone rang and I heard somebody calling my name.
Yeah.
Okay, here is another one. This one is from Bonnie O. And she said, 3 years ago, my mother passed away. We were very close, and I miss her daily. Last Christmas evening, I went to bed and woke up to the phone ringing. I answered it, and a voice that was very familiar to me said, "Hello there." It was my mother's voice. The line had a static noise, and the sound cut in and out. I said, "This can't be you, Mom. You're dead." She said, "Oh, come on now." She sounded a bit agitated, and then we were cut off. My 16-year-old daughter was sleeping in the next room and also heard the phone ring that night. I know it was my mother's voice. She has a Norwegian accent. It was her.
So I'd really like to see something like that recorded.
Yeah.
I know there must be alleged recordings like that. I mean, even for fakery, the temptation is too great to just fake it, right? So you'd expect at least some fakes. Obviously, I believe you. So obviously, I must believe there are other people who also have had that experience to some degree. That means there should be enough people out there that there are recordings of the same type of phenomena. Either it was someone was faking you, which doesn't seem likely, and there's other fakes out there, but I want to hear those fakes, or I want to hear those things.
Okay, so here's one thing I will say. Now, I could almost say, yeah, sure, someone might have just been calling me and it was just a crappy line, except that the only other time ever I've heard a phone sound like that was those phone calls right after my mom died and the phone calls right after we moved to Earl, where they were that staticky thing, except nobody talked. And that is the absolutely only time I've ever had a phone call that sounded even remotely like that. I've never received another phone call where somebody's voice sounded distant, staticky, never. I've had, now that was a landline, it was a corded landline. It wasn't a cordless landline. And that's important to remember because cordless phones can have weird anomalies, but I've never heard one that sounded like that. And
so the type of distortion was qualitatively different than other distortions you've heard.
Absolutely, except for those other phone calls where it was kind of staticky, kind of feedbacky. It was sort of that same thing, except instead of feedback, I heard a voice. So the other ones were staticky with the feedback, distant kind of, but instead of the feedback, I heard a voice. So I don't know. I really don't know. And after that, those phone calls, I don't know. Christina might have gotten some more of those phone calls. I never got another one of the phone calls in Earl.
I'm trying to imagine possible mechanisms, even ones that are quote unquote paranormal, that could explain the distortion, So in the simplest model, there's a spirit realm, let's say, where people can inhabit after they die or while they're alive, whatever. The astral realm, let's call it.
The astral realm.
The astral realm can interact with physical reality to some degree. But what would cause the distortion? The interaction isn't exactly precise, let's say. For instance, if I tap on this, I won't tap on that. I won't tap on this. And so if you tap once in the astral realm with the intention of creating a tap in the physical realm, there might be an echo in the tap or something. You can imagine something like that. And then when you're interacting with a phone line, that same effect has some other, it looks different. You can imagine that. But the fact that there is like a distortion means that there's interaction that's that's not as obvious as just like I tap on the wall in the ghost realm and you hear the tap. You know what I mean?
So what my feeling was then, and it still pretty much is that if something in the spirit realm is trying to pass through whatever veil there is between them and us, it requires more energy, or it requires a different kind of energy to do that. Mm-hmm. And when it does that, maybe there's interference, just like feedback. Mm-hmm. Just like feedback. If I put a microphone next to something,
Yeah. So that's the other thing. If you from the astral realm to the physical realm,
I have to laugh
because
it sounds so silly.
It does sound silly, but that's because of the historical connotations of saying, if the interface for interaction between this universe and that universe is really simple. Like I can tap on the equivalent wall and you can hear it in the other one. If I tap and I produce sound waves, and the sound waves then also can interact on the other side, because why couldn't they? Then there is essentially feedback. You now have an interaction that way, an interaction the other way, that can perpetuate itself.
Okay, yeah.
But it would beg the question then, why wouldn't things just automatically do that? Maybe they do. So why wouldn't ghosts just automatically produce light? Now, quantum mechanical interpretation of this strange possible phenomena, which I should say is it's like the most likely explanation for strange shit, because we know it happens at a microscopic scale. There are very smart people who interpret quantum mechanics as being able to happen on a macroscopic scale, and weak interactions between different histories. So those are like parallel universes that came from the same source. I should say they're not actually like separate. It's the same universe, they're just weakly interacting.
Okay. And
they're continuous. There are universes between the two that might look very strange. But anyway, that there is automatic interaction between all universes, like all different universes, that may even go off in all sorts of different directions. You only are perceiving the universe you're perceiving because it's recorded in your brain. So if you didn't record that you talked to somebody who's already dead, then it wouldn't be part of your universe. So there are automatically effects where you might perceive things that didn't happen, or perceive things strangely because that's how they were recorded. Mm-hmm. But like barring the memory effects, if you tap on a wall, it doesn't require like astral universe or whatever. If you tap on a wall, there is automatically 100% an interaction between that wall and all the other, what you could say are equivalent versions of the wall. Mm-hmm. Whether or not that's recorded in anyone else's brain, like your own brain. If I pound on the wall, it may be that a different version of myself hears it, Mm-hmm. And because the interaction between weakly coupled parallel universes, I'll say, isn't as straightforward as you would expect, there very well could be resonant feedback. So quantum mechanics is primarily a wave-like phenomenon. And it corresponds interestingly with like New Age type people who say, the frequencies and the resonance and whatever. Yeah. I think that actually comes from physics, because quantum mechanics is all about waves and how waves interact and what waves can exist in certain states. Anyway, so again, that best model for what's happening, so you can actually make a prediction from this. If you're talking to someone who's dead in your universe, they also are like, what is going on? They will also be confused because they're having an interaction with you and it's not like they expect. Like you could be in a different room and they're having a conversation with you who's also alive in their universe just across universal boundaries.
Well, that hurts my brain. Okay, so earlier you said, why would they even do that? Why would a dead person even, why wouldn't they be communicating with you all the time? This is what I think. I think it's like, why am I not calling India every
Right
hour
now.
of the day?
Yeah.
Why would I call her all the
Mm-hmm.
time? She's busy. I'm busy. She's doing her own thing. I'm doing my own thing. That's kind of how I feel. In fact, right after my mom died, the same morning as I was driving back from hospice, I had this really significant impression of her just going off and doing her thing. Just not like, I can't even explain it. It was like when you were in college, I just was secure in the knowledge that you were doing your own thing. You're in college. You're doing your own thing. And
it's not like lost. They're actually doing something.
Right. That's just you're doing what you do, and whatever that is. And I didn't really know what that is. I didn't know what your experience was at school. That was your experience, and that was fine because it was yours. And that's the sense I got when my mom died. Now, since my mom died, I've had other people die. My father has never called me. Mm-hmm. I have not had any supernatural experience about my father, and I actually had a conversation with my father before he died and said, you come back and you talk to me. You come back and we laughed and laughed. And my dad was really into paranormal stuff, mm-hmm. and I've never had any weird situation with him. Aunt Barbara, who I was very close to, never had any kind of thing. I've had dreams about her, but none of them felt like dreams I've had about other people that felt significant. Mm-hmm. So I've had a lot of people die, but never have I had anything like that. So I don't think it's that I'm unstable or anything else, and I don't think that it's so particularly difficult. I think it's just like, why? What do they have to say that would require a phone call? I think what you said about the parallel universes, and I'm putting my tongue firmly in my cheek when I say that. But,
as you should.
Yes. That maybe on the other side, they're on the phone going, what? Because they know that their version of me is in the other room, but here I'm on the phone. Yeah. And so it's a confusion.
And also, I should also say, in that interpretation, there's way, way, way more interactions than you could possibly imagine. There's universes where they actually physically completely enter your universe.
Okay, well, I think that, of course, I'm half blind without glasses on, as you know. And if I take my glasses off, there's almost a feeling of body to everything.
Oh, uh-huh.
And I can't really explain it, but my sense is that if there are other universes that are coexisting, and you say they are in quantum physics, and I have no reason not to believe
Could
you.
be. It's one interpretation.
But if there are other universes or other things going on simultaneously, if time is even a construct, I would say it's right here around us all the time. If somebody makes there's some kind of crossover, it's less about being that they're somewhere else. Everything is right here.
It's
right
as close as you can.
Yes, it's just
It's
right
not
here.
even a dimension thing.
Right.
It's literally the exact same space.
Yes, exactly. Literally the exact same
and
space.
every interaction happens, every possible interaction.
All at the same time. Yeah. And so
Everywhere.
it's just like we're a radio dial.
I mean, that's, again, one interpretation, and it might not actually work like that. It could be that the number of universes is so super constrained, there's essentially only one. Mm-hmm. There are not alternates.
Well, as I've said before to you, the radio dial analogy, I think, makes the most sense to me, because if all of these different radio stations are all broadcasting, they're all broadcasting simultaneously, and all you have to do is tune into one of them, and then you'll hear that crystal clear, and you won't hear the others, and you change the dial and you hear another one. If it's as simple as that it's all happening simultaneously, and if you just turn the dial, you'll pick up this, and maybe we're at 95.7. But if I turn it over here,
you see the New Age connection of the frequencies. Mm-hmm. Same kind of thing, where you tune in to a different wavelength.
Right.
And that is a good analogy, because a lot of things actually do work like that. For instance, you get a new white SUV. And now all you can see are white SUVs. It's sort of that same thing. Something becomes more receptive to a particular type of interaction, with the rest of the world.
Right, like the people who say that they always see the numbers 111.
Yeah.
And so at 111 every day, they look at their clock.
Yeah.
Or more often than not, if they look at their watch, it's 111.
Yeah.
Or they'll be walking down the street and they'll see a book and it'll say, 111 on it. Is that observation? And I think it is. Or is that something paranormal that's putting those things in your path? I don't think so. I think it's observation. I think that everything is there all the time. And if you tune into that and you say...
So, again, I should also say, all of what we've been talking about is contingent upon materialism being correct, which I believe I got the ism right. Materialism says there's a physical world, things are really happening, your brain and everything is hosted physically in this, it's not like there's a separate mind realm or whatever. Things have physical rules and they behave these things. There's a lot more stuff that's not conscious, like, there really are electrons flowing through. Problem is from your perspective, you actually cannot. There's nothing you can do to distinguish between what you're perceiving is a really actual material world or an entirely perceptive world. So look at it like this. Materialism is a mind simulated by a physical world. Universe. So physical world, it means all cogs and machines, little electrons bouncing all and protons forming atoms and whatever. And you are simulated in that world. There's no way to distinguish that from there's a mind, and the mind is the universe, and the physical world is simulated by the mind. So everything you see, it's actually just entirely conceptual.
Now, see, that kind of stuff is what is the stuff of nightmares.
Freaks you out, yeah. But it's actually kind of cool too, because for instance, you could imagine going to a different time or place or fucking astral realm and talking to people, and that actually is something that's happening. I mean, to some degree, and it opens up the door to radically different experiences. Yeah. And also, I should note, there are the essentially the multi-agency model of that conceptual mind-only universe. Then there's the multi-view and the single view. Single view is saying there's one consciousness. That's the mind, and there's only one perspective. And there's no way to determine which is correct. The multi-view is saying, yes, there really are different consciousnesses that are a part of this universe, but the physical reality everyone sees really is just a product of those many minds coming together and looking. So for instance, that kitchen or whatever exists in our minds. When we're not looking at it, it still exists, but only in our memories. And when we come across something new, we're just basically filling in the gaps. However that works for the mental universe.
Years ago, there was some kind of pop culture movie that was out, and I can't remember what it was called, but it supposedly was about quantum mechanics. And it was kind of that same sort of thing, that if you conceive of it, but then they made it all cartoony and popish, and somebody thinks of something and something pops into being, and I suppose it's oversimplified for people, but I find that disturbing for some reason. Seriously,
like that?
No, what you were saying.
Oh,
seriously,
okay.
Deeply disturbing, and I don't
think
know
it's
why.
The impermanence aspect. It's not like I know the universe will continue to exist whatever happens to me. It's that you are the universe. So anything happening to you is also happening to the entire fucking universe.
But then,
if you're trying to come up with interpretations for these things, you have to look at how or why or what's the universe like or whatever, and you inevitably come back to certain things like this. I'll say again about the quantum mechanical thing, because that is one model that's it's not definitive anywhere near definitive, but we know stuff like this happens at the microscopic scale. Very smart people have come up with this interpretation, and it can't be ruled out from what we know now.
Right.
Macroscopic phenomenon is, it's pretty much definitively that it must happen. Again, Schrodinger's cat. The cat depends on a microscopic process. The microscopic process behaves exactly like what I've talked about. It can self-interact. It can do all sorts of weird stuff.
Okay, so let me ask you something.
It's a good model.
So, do you think it was my mother that called me on the phone in the middle of the night?
So I operate on multiple stages of belief. I feel that definitely something strange happened outside of the ordinary. But I don't know if I believe or know what that was.
What do you think? Did my dead mom call me on the phone? How about Matt's friend Joe? Have you ever had a phone call from the dead? Let us know. Our contact information is in the show notes. And as always, if you have a story you want to tell, send it to us. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.